If you clicked on this video, you're probably confused right now. About your life direction, about your purpose, about decisions you need to make, about who you are or what you're meant to do. And every voice in your culture is telling you that confusion is a problem. But what if everything you've been taught about confusion is backwards? What if confusion isn't the obstacle blocking you from quantum manifestation? What if confusion is the doorway? There's a quantum principle so counterintuitive that Western mind rejects it immediately. Certainty closes possibilities while confusion opens them. When you're certain, when you know exactly what you want and how to get it, you've collapsed the quantum field into single narrow probability. You can only perceive and manifest what matches your certainty. But when you're confused, when you genuinely don't know what to do or where to go or what's true, the quantum field remains in superposition. All possibilities stay open. Every potential outcome exists simultaneously. And that state of not knowing, that confusion your ego hates, is actually the most powerful manifestation state consciousness can occupy. Can you feel that? That subtle shift happening as you read these words. Something in you recognizes this truth, even though it contradicts everything you've been taught. Confusion isn't failure. Confusion is the quantum door opening. And if you're experiencing confusion right now, if clarity feels impossibly far away, if you have no idea what you're doing or where you're going, congratulations. The quantum field just gave you access to infinite possibility instead of trapping you in the limitations of false certainty. Quantum physics proves this with devastating precision. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle shows that the more precisely you know one property of a particle, the less precisely you can know its complementary property. Certainty in one area creates uncertainty in another. This isn't limitation of measurement. This is fundamental nature of reality. The universe itself operates on uncertainty. Particles exist in superposition until measured, which means they exist in all possible states simultaneously, until observation forces them into single definite state. The confusion, the uncertainty, the not knowing, that's reality's natural condition. Certainty is the artificial construct humans impose through observation. But here's what makes this revelation revolutionary for your life. You've been taught that manifestation requires absolute clarity about what you want. That you need to know your goal precisely, visualize it perfectly, have complete certainty about desired outcome. And then you wonder why manifestation is difficult. Why you feel blocked. Why desired reality stays out of reach. It's because you're trying to manifest from certainty, which collapses quantum field into narrow probability, before you've explored full range of what's actually possible. You're choosing from limited options your current awareness can perceive, instead of allowing quantum field to present possibilities your certainty would never imagine. Think about the most significant breakthroughs in your life. The relationships, opportunities, transformations that changed everything. How many of those emerged from certainty? How many did you plan, predict, know were coming? Most likely the biggest shifts happened when you were confused. When you didn't know what to do. When you're in transition, in uncertainty, in that uncomfortable space where ego has no map and consciousness doesn't know which direction to choose. That confusion created opening for quantum field to deliver what your certainty would have filtered out as impossible. The ancient mystics understood this completely. The cloud of unknowing medieval Christian text teaches that God can only be reached through darkness of not knowing, rather than through light of understanding. Zen Buddhism uses koans, paradoxical questions with no logical answers, specifically to induce confusion that breaks mind's attachment to certainty. Indigenous wisdom traditions speak of liminal space, threshold states, the confusion between worlds where magic happens. They all recognized confusion isn't obstacle to overcome. Confusion is portal to access. Take a breath, deep one, and feel into your confusion right now, not as something to solve or escape, as doorway, as invitation, as the quantum field saying, your certainty was too small, your clarity was limiting you, your knowing was preventing you from receiving what I'm trying to deliver. The confusion isn't evidence that you're lost. The confusion is evidence that quantum door just opened. And infinite possibility is available if you're willing to step through without knowing where it leads. Before we go deeper into how to use confusion as quantum doorway rather than treating it as problem to solve, you need to understand why confusion feels so uncomfortable. Why ego hates it. Why every instinct says to escape confusion and return to certainty as quickly as possible. Because once you see what's actually happening when you're confused, once you recognize the mechanics, you'll stop fighting confusion and start recognizing it as the gift it actually is. The first reason confusion feels unbearable is because ego equates it with danger. Your survival brain evolved to create certainty about environment. Where threats are, where safety is, what actions lead to survival. Confusion meant not knowing whether that sound in the darkness was predator or wind, and that uncertainty could be fatal. So brain developed powerful aversion to not knowing, to ambiguity, to any state where outcomes aren't predictable. That ancient survival mechanism is still operating, treating confusion about life direction with same urgency as confusion about physical danger, even though they're completely different. The second reason is cultural conditioning that equates confusion with incompetence. You're supposed to know what you want, supposed to have clear goals, supposed to be decisive, directed, certain about your path. People who don't know what they're doing are viewed as lost, weak, failing. Success is associated with clarity while confusion is associated with failure. This conditioning is so deep, you probably feel shame about your confusion, like it's evidence of personal inadequacy, rather than recognizing it as quantum state that precedes breakthrough. The third reason is that confusion requires surrendering control. When you're certain, ego feels in control, knows what to do, how to do it, what outcome to expect. But confusion strips away that illusion of control. You can't predict, can't plan, can't know what's coming. And ego interprets loss of control as death. Not metaphorical death. Ego literally feels like it's dying when it can't maintain certainty about reality. The panic you feel in confusion isn't about external circumstances, it's ego's terror at losing the control it never actually had. The fourth reason is that education system punishes confusion while rewarding certainty. From earliest age, you're taught that not knowing is shameful, that you should have answers. That confusion means you weren't paying attention, weren't smart enough, didn't study hard enough. Tests reward certainty. Right answers get points, confusion gets failure. This trains consciousness to avoid confusion at all costs, to grab onto any answer even if it's wrong just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. You've been programmed to fear the very state that opens quantum door. But here's what you need to recognize. All of these reactions to confusion are based on misunderstanding what confusion actually is. Confusion isn't lack of information. Confusion is consciousness transitioning between frameworks. When your current way of understanding reality stops working, but new way hasn't emerged yet, you experience confusion. When old patterns of thinking can't resolve new situations but new patterns haven't formed yet, you feel confused. When consciousness is expanding beyond its current limitations but hasn't stabilized in larger perspective yet, confusion is natural result. Think about caterpillar dissolving in cocoon. If caterpillar had conscious awareness during that process, it would feel profoundly confused. Everything it knew itself to be is dissolving. It's no longer caterpillar, but not yet butterfly. It exists in undefined state between forms. That transition, that metamorphosis, requires complete confusion about what it is and what it's becoming. Without that confusion, without that state of not knowing, transformation into butterfly couldn't occur. The confusion is a necessary feature of evolution, not error or malfunction. You're the caterpillar. Your confusion is the cocoon. Your certainty about who you were and what you wanted was caterpillar identity. And consciousness is dissolving that identity not because something's wrong, but because you're ready for quantum leap that caterpillar thinking can't accommodate. The butterfly doesn't emerge by figuring out how to be better caterpillar. The butterfly emerges by allowing complete confusion about what it is during dissolution phase. Your confusion isn't preventing transformation, your confusion is transformation. The quantum door opens in confusion, because only in confusion is consciousness fluid enough to receive new possibilities. Certainty solidifies consciousness into fixed patterns. Confusion liquefies consciousness so it can take new forms. The ancient alchemists called this solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, everything solid must dissolve into confusion. Then, from that dissolved state, new forms can coagulate. But you can't skip the dissolution. You can't avoid the confusion. Trying to return to certainty prematurely aborts the transformation that's trying to occur through the confusion. There are specific signals that confirm your confusion is quantum doorway opening, rather than evidence that you're lost or failing. These signals help you distinguish between confusion that's consciousness expanding versus confusion that's just mind spinning in habitual patterns. And recognizing these signals allows you to trust the confusion, to stay in the not knowing, to let quantum door remain open instead of prematurely closing it by forcing false certainty. The first signal is that your confusion emerged after a period of certainty. You knew what you wanted, where you were going, what you were doing. Then suddenly that certainty dissolved. The path that seemed clear becomes unclear. The goals that felt right feel wrong or empty. The identity that was solid becomes questionable. This sequence, certainty followed by sudden confusion, indicates consciousness is expanding beyond previous framework. The old certainty was too small. The confusion is quantum field saying, there are larger possibilities I'm preparing to reveal, but first, you need to release your attachment to the limited certainty you are holding. The second signal is that normal problem solving doesn't resolve the confusion. You try to think it through, analyze options, make pro-con lists, seek advice, research solutions, and none of it creates clarity. Usually, when you're confused about something, gathering more information or thinking harder produces answer. But quantum confusion doesn't work that way. More thinking creates more confusion. More analysis creates more uncertainty. This is because the confusion isn't about lacking information. The confusion is about consciousness transitioning to framework where your current way of thinking doesn't apply. No amount of thinking within old framework will resolve confusion that's arising from outgrowing that framework. The third signal is synchronicities increase despite your confusion. If you were truly lost, if confusion indicated you were off path, synchronicities would decrease. But instead, meaningful coincidences intensify. Right people appear. Right information arrives. Circumstances align in ways that seem to support you, even though you don't understand what you're being supported toward. This happens because quantum field is organizing reality around your expanding consciousness, even while ego is confused about what's happening. The synchronicity is a quantum door showing you. Trust the confusion, it's leading somewhere even if you can't see where yet. The fourth signal is creative energy emerges from confusion. You start writing, making art, having insights that don't come from logical thinking. Ideas appear that you don't know where they came from. Solutions present themselves for problems you weren't consciously working on. This occurs because confusion opens channel for quantum information to flow through consciousness without ego filtering it. When you're certain, ego controls what information gets through based on whether it matches existing framework. When you're confused, ego's filters are temporarily offline, and quantum intelligence can communicate directly. The fifth signal is that you feel simultaneously lost and guided. Your mind doesn't know what's happening or where to go, but something deeper than mind feels like it knows. Like you're being moved by intelligence you don't understand but somehow trust. This paradox, lost and guided coexisting, is signature of quantum door opening. The lostness is ego losing its maps. The guidance is quantum self navigating through consciousness beyond ego's comprehension. The sixth signal is old attachments naturally released during confusion. Things that mattered before stop mattering. Goals that drove you lose their appeal. Relationships that felt essential become optional. This isn't depression or apathy. This is consciousness clearing space for what's emerging. The confusion is making room by dissolving attachments to old certainties so new possibilities can manifest without having to compete with ego's predetermined agenda. The seventh signal is that reading these words creates recognition, maybe even tears. If your confusion were just mental problem, this teaching would feel irrelevant or frustrating. But if quantum door is opening through your confusion, these words resonate at depth because they're naming what you're experiencing, validating what you're going through, confirming that the confusion you've been fighting against is actually doorway you should be walking through. Write in the comments which signals you're experiencing. Just list them. Certainty dissolved, or synchronicities increasing, or creative emergence. That acknowledgement does something quantum. It stabilizes your willingness to stay confused instead of forcing premature clarity. It tells quantum field, I trust this process. I'm willing to not know. I'm ready to stay in doorway until it fully opens and reveals what's on other side. To walk through quantum door that confusion opens, to actually use not knowing as access point for manifestation that certainty blocks. You need to learn how to be confused consciously. Because there's difference between ego spinning in confusion, which is suffering, and consciousness resting in confusion, which is power. Most people experience ego confusion. Very few have learned conscious confusion, and that difference determines whether confusion leads to breakthrough or keeps you trapped in circular thinking. Ego confusion is when you're trying to eliminate confusion, trying to figure it out, solve it, get back to certainty as quickly as possible. Mind races through options, analyzes possibilities, seeks information, asks others for answers, all attempts to escape the not knowing. This creates suffering because you're fighting against the confusion instead of allowing it. You're trying to close quantum door that's trying to open. And ego confusion generates no new possibilities because you're only considering options your current framework can recognize. You're rearranging familiar furniture instead of discovering new architecture. Conscious confusion is completely different. It's when you recognize you don't know and you stop trying to know. You rest in the not knowing. You allow the uncertainty without needing to resolve it. You let quantum doors stay open without forcing yourself through before you can see what's on the other side. This doesn't mean passive waiting or doing nothing. This means engaging with confusion as valid state rather than as problem to solve. Asking, what is this confusion showing me? Instead of, how do I get rid of this confusion? The shift from ego confusion to conscious confusion begins with single recognition. I don't know, and that's okay. Not as resignation or giving up. As truth. As permission to be in uncertainty without labeling it as failure. Most people have never given themselves permission to truly not know. They've always pushed toward knowing, toward clarity, toward certainty. But what if not knowing is exactly where you need to be? What if the quantum door only opens for consciousness that's willing to not have answers? Practice this now. Think about whatever you're confused about. The decision you can't make. The direction you can't discern. The question you can't answer. And instead of trying to resolve it, just acknowledge, I don't know. Say it out loud if you can. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's right. I don't know where to go. And feel what happens in your body, in your energy, in your consciousness, when you stop fighting the not knowing and simply allow it. There's usually immediate relaxation, subtle relief, like you've been holding your breath and finally exhaled. That relaxation is consciousness dropping into quantum state, into superposition where all possibilities exist simultaneously instead of collapsed into single option your ego was trying to force. In that relaxed, not knowing, in that conscious confusion, you're no longer blocking quantum field from presenting possibilities your certainty would filter out. You're open, receptive, available to receive what wants to emerge rather than demanding it match what you think you want. The second trick is asking better questions. Ego asks, what should I do? Which presupposes there's right answer you need to figure out. But conscious confusion asks, what wants to happen? Or what's trying to emerge, or what possibilities exist that I can't currently see. These questions don't demand answers from your current understanding. They invite quantum intelligence to reveal what's available beyond your current perception. They create space for something genuinely new, instead of forcing something familiar, dressed as new. The third practice is tracking energy, rather than analyzing options. When you're confused about decision, ego makes lists of pros and cons, weighs options logically, tries to predict outcomes. But quantum door opens through energy, not through logic. So instead of thinking about options, feel into them. Which possibility creates expansion in your body? Which creates contraction? Which feels alive even if scary? Which feels dead even if safe? Energy doesn't lie. Logic can rationalize anything, but energy shows you quantum truth that mind can't perceive. The fourth practice is acting from uncertainty rather than waiting for certainty before acting. This seems paradoxical because you're confused. So how do you act without knowing what to do? But conscious confusion doesn't mean paralysis. It means taking next step without needing to know where the path leads. Doing what wants to be done now without needing to understand how it fits into larger plan. Quantum field reveals path one step at a time to consciousness that's willing to move in uncertainty. Ego demands entire map before taking first step. That's why ego never walks through quantum door. The door only opens for consciousness willing to step into unknown. 7 years ago, I was more confused than I'd ever been in my life. Everything I'd built my certainty around, my career path, my relationship, my life direction, my understanding of who I was and what I wanted, all of it dissolved simultaneously. I would wake up each morning with no idea what to do with the day, because every previous structure for organizing life had collapsed. And the confusion was so total, so complete, that I couldn't even identify options to choose between. It wasn't should I do A or B, it was I have no idea what I'm doing or why I'm doing anything. The terror was overwhelming at first. Ego panicked, screaming that I needed to figure it out immediately, get back to certainty, create new plan, know what I was doing. I spent weeks trying to eliminate the confusion. Reading books, taking courses, seeking guidance from teachers and mentors, anything to escape the unbearable state of not knowing. But nothing worked. Every attempt to create certainty felt forced, false, like I was performing clarity rather than actually being clear. The confusion wouldn't resolve no matter how hard I tried. Then something shifted. Not dramatic insight or spiritual revelation, just exhaustion. I was so tired of fighting the confusion that I stopped trying to figure it out, stopped seeking answers, stopped demanding certainty. And in that stopping, in that surrender into not knowing, the most profound peace I'd ever experienced emerged. The confusion didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like problem. It started feeling like possibility, like opening, like doorway to something my certainty had been preventing me from accessing. From that state of conscious confusion, life began reorganizing itself in ways I couldn't have imagined from my previous certainty. Opportunities appeared that weren't on my radar when I was certain about what I wanted. Connections formed with people I wouldn't have met if I'd been following my clear plan. Insights emerged that my certainty would have filtered out as irrelevant. Within 6 months, I was living completely different life than any version I'd tried to manifest from certainty. And it wasn't that I'd figured out what to do. It's that I'd allowed quantum field to reveal what wanted to happen through my willingness to stay confused instead of forcing premature clarity. What I learned during those months changed everything about how I approach manifestation. Certainty is overrated. Clarity is often just ego pretending to know things it doesn't actually know. The real power is in conscious confusion. In being so profoundly okay with not knowing that quantum field can present possibilities your knowing would never allow. This doesn't mean never having clarity. It means recognizing that clarity emerges from confusion when you stop trying to force it. That certainty manifests naturally when you rest in uncertainty long enough for quantum intelligence to reveal what's actually aligned. The breakthrough came when I recognized my previous certainty hadn't been wisdom, it had been limitation. I'd been so sure about what I wanted that I could only perceive narrow range of possibilities. And quantum field couldn't deliver what I actually needed, because I was blocking anything that didn't match my predetermined idea of what I thought I needed. The confusion dissolved that blockage, opened me to receive what was actually available, rather than what I was demanding based on limited perspective. This is what I wish someone had told me decades earlier. That confusion isn't evidence you're failing or lost or off track. Confusion is consciousness expanding beyond current framework and temporarily existing in transition where old way doesn't work, but new way hasn't fully emerged yet. That state, uncomfortable as it feels, is where quantum magic happens. That's where possibilities beyond your imagination become accessible. That's where transformation occurs that certainty prevents. Your confusion might be different from mine. Your quantum door might open through different circumstances, but the principle is same. Stop fighting the confusion. Stop trying to get back to certainty. Stay in the not knowing consciously rather than suffering in not knowing unconsciously. Trust that confusion is doorway, not dead end. Allow quantum field to work through your uncertainty rather than demanding it match your certainty. And watch what emerges that your knowing never could have created. Now that you understand confusion as quantum doorway rather than as problem to solve, the question becomes practical. How do you function in a world that demands certainty when you're consciously confused? How do you make decisions, maintain responsibilities, explain yourself to others when you genuinely don't know what you're doing or where you're going? Because quantum confusion isn't escape from practical reality. It's learning to engage with reality from state that allows quantum possibilities rather than limiting yourself to ego's narrow certainties. The first key is distinguish between essential certainty and ego certainty. Essential certainty is immediate knowing. I'm hungry, so I'll eat. I'm tired, so I'll rest. This feels right, so I'll do it. That kind of certainty doesn't require overall life plan or clear future vision. It's just present moment responsiveness. Ego certainty is the demand to know how everything will unfold, what everything means, where everything is leading. You don't need ego certainty to function. You just need essential certainty about next appropriate step. Practice making decisions from immediate knowing rather than from overall certainty. When you're confused about life direction, you can still know what wants to happen in this moment. You might not know your career path, but you know whether you want to work today or rest. Might not know your relationship future, but you know whether you want to connect or have space right now. Quantum confusion doesn't mean paralysis. It means making each decision freshly based on present awareness rather than based on predetermined plan. The second key is learning to say I don't know without apologizing. Western culture expects certainty. People ask, what are you doing with your life? Expecting clear answer. When you say I don't know, they usually respond with concern, advice, suggestions for how to figure it out. But their discomfort with your uncertainty is their problem, not yours. You can be honestly uncertain without making it mean something's wrong. I don't know is complete statement. It doesn't require justification or plan for how you'll resolve not knowing. The third key is using provisional language when certainty is socially expected. You can't always say, I have no idea what I'm doing, in professional contexts or with people who wouldn't understand quantum confusion. So use language that's true, but doesn't trigger others' discomfort. Instead of, I'm completely confused about my purpose, say I'm exploring different directions. Instead of, I have no idea where I'm going, say, I'm in transition. This isn't lying. It's translating your quantum state into language that allows you to navigate world without constant explanations. The fourth key is creating space for confusion rather than filling every moment with distraction. Ego hates confusion and will try to escape it through busyness, entertainment, substances, relationships, anything to avoid sitting with not knowing. But quantum door only opens when you actually stay in doorway rather than running back to familiar room of false certainty. Create time for just being confused, sitting with it, feeling it, allowing it without trying to resolve it. That space is where quantum intelligence communicates most clearly. The fifth key is distinguishing between intuition and ego's anxiety. When you're confused, ego generates constant stream of thoughts disguised as intuition. You should do this. You need to decide that. This means you're failing. But real quantum guidance doesn't feel like pressure or urgency. It feels like knowing. Quiet certainty that arises without thinking it through. Practice noticing the difference. Ego's false guidance creates contraction, stress, fear. Quantum guidance creates expansion, peace, rightness, even when it's challenging. The sixth key is tracking what emerges during confusion rather than demanding specific outcomes. You might be confused about career, but notice that you're writing more. You might be confused about relationships, but notice you're enjoying solitude. You might be confused about purpose, but notice you're drawn to certain activities or people or ideas. What emerges during confusion shows you what quantum field is organizing, even if you can't yet see how pieces fit together. Trust the emergence more than you trust your attempts to control direction. These keys aren't meant to eliminate confusion or return you to certainty. They're meant to make confusion workable, functional, even productive, to show you that you can live fully while genuinely not knowing where you're going or what you're doing. That confusion and functionality aren't opposites. That quantum doorway can stay open while you're engaged with practical reality, allowing possibilities to present themselves while you navigate daily life. Something profound happens after you stabilize in conscious confusion. After you stop fighting not knowing and start recognizing it as quantum doorway, manifestation begins occurring in ways that seem magical, but are actually quantum mechanical. Things you couldn't have manifested from certainty start appearing. Opportunities that weren't visible when you had clear plans suddenly present themselves. Life reorganizes in directions you wouldn't have chosen if you'd been choosing from your limited certainty. And all of it happens not despite your confusion, but because of it. This is where most manifestation teaching goes wrong. They tell you to get clear, get certain, know exactly what you want, visualize specific outcome, hold unwavering focus on desired reality, and all of that collapses quantum field prematurely. You're forcing field into narrow probability before you've explored full range of what's actually possible. You're manifesting from ego's limited imagination rather than allowing quantum intelligence to deliver what consciousness actually needs for highest evolution. But when you're in conscious confusion, when you're genuinely open to whatever wants to emerge because you don't have fixed idea about what should emerge, quantum field can work miracles. Not supernatural miracles, quantum miracles, where probabilities that seemed impossible become actual because you weren't blocking them with certainty that they couldn't exist. Where synchronicities align circumstances in ways that logic can't explain because you weren't limiting field to logical possibilities. Where perfect opportunities appear that you wouldn't have recognized if you'd been focused on different predetermined opportunity. Think about how quantum superposition works. Particle exists in all possible states simultaneously until observation collapses it into definite state. When you're certain about what you want, you're observing quantum field through very narrow lens that can only perceive small range of possibilities. That narrow observation collapses field into limited manifestation, matching your limited perception. But when you're confused, when you genuinely don't know what you want or what's possible, you're not collapsing field prematurely. You're allowing it to remain in superposition longer, which means more possibilities stay available until quantum intelligence itself determines which one serves your highest good. This is why the ancient oracles gave cryptic, confused-sounding answers rather than clear directives. Why spiritual teachers often respond to questions with more questions that create confusion rather than providing clarity. Why indigenous wisdom traditions valued mystery and not knowing rather than demanding certainty. They understood that consciousness needs to be confused, to be quantum. That clarity often prevents transformation by locking you into limited version of what's possible. That the not knowing creates space for emergence of what knowing would never allow. But there's challenge here that stops most people from ever experiencing this quantum manifestation through confusion. The gap between when you surrender into conscious confusion and when manifestation appears can feel unbearable. You're not certain about anything. You're not working towards specific goal. You're just being confused. An ego screams that you're wasting time, that you should be doing something, that uncertainty is dangerous. Most people can't tolerate that gap. They give up on conscious confusion and return to false certainty just to escape the discomfort. That's why radical trust is required, not blind faith, not positive thinking. but trust in quantum mechanics themselves. Trust that when you're in superposition, when you're in conscious confusion with quantum door open, the field is organizing reality around possibilities that serve your evolution, whether you can see them yet or not. Trust that manifestation is occurring at quantum level before it becomes visible at physical level. Trust that confusion is active state of creation rather than passive state of waiting. During my 6 months of profound confusion, there were weeks where nothing seemed to be happening. No clarity emerging. No obvious manifestations. No signs that quantum field was working. Just ongoing confusion, with no resolution. Ego wanted to abandon the process, to force decision, to create certainty even if artificial. But something deeper kept trusting. Not that everything would work out how I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted. But that confusion itself was working, was creating, was opening possibilities that my certainty would have prevented. And then suddenly, not gradually but suddenly, everything clicked into place. The perfect opportunity appeared. The right people connected, the circumstances aligned. And it was so far beyond what I would have manifested from my previous certainty that I could immediately see. If I'd forced clarity earlier, if I'd collapsed quantum field based on my limited understanding, I would have manifested smaller version of what was actually possible. The confusion had kept field open long enough for quantum intelligence to organize optimal manifestation rather than just acceptable manifestation. What's happening to you individually as you learn to use confusion as quantum doorway is happening to millions globally. This isn't isolated phenomenon. This is collective consciousness evolving from certainty-based creation to quantum-based manifestation. Where enough humans are simultaneously recognizing that confusion opens possibilities while certainty limits them. That the entire species is beginning to operate from different paradigm of how reality creates itself through consciousness. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance research shows that once enough members of species learn new behavior, that behavior becomes available to all members through resonance in collective field. The first humans who recognized confusion as doorway rather than as problem had to discover this truth without support, without validation, without any confirmation that their experience was real. But each person who learns to be consciously confused now makes it easier for others. The morphic field contains the patent. The possibility has been proven. The quantum doorway through confusion is now accessible to anyone whose consciousness is ready. You're not pioneering this shift. You're benefiting from everyone who came before. Mystics who dwelt in cloud of unknowing, scientists who embraced uncertainty principles, artists who created from confusion, teachers who pointed toward not knowing as wisdom rather than as ignorance. They established the pathway. They proved consciousness can function from confusion. They demonstrated that certainty is optional and often limiting. And their recognition made your recognition easier. And every time you choose conscious confusion over forced certainty, every time you allow quantum door to stay open rather than demanding premature clarity, every time you trust not knowing rather than grabbing first available answer, you strengthen morphic field for everyone approaching this threshold. Your willingness to be confused serves the collective. You make it easier for others to release their addiction to certainty. You contribute to species evolution from limited ego-based manifestation to unlimited quantum-based creation. But there's something else happening at collective level that makes this moment unique. The old, certainty-based systems are collapsing. Economic structures built on predictability. Social structures organized around fixed roles. Political systems based on claiming to know what's best. Educational systems that reward certainty and punish confusion. All of it reaching end point because consciousness is outgrowing the paradigm where certainty is valued over truth, where appearing to know is rewarded over admitting uncertainty. The solution isn't better certainty. The solution is collective comfort with confusion. When enough humans learn to be consciously confused, learn to function from not knowing, learn to manifest from quantum openness rather than from ego's limited certainties, entire civilization shifts. New systems emerge that honor uncertainty as creative state. New structures form that allow fluid adaptation rather than rigid predictability. New ways of being human become possible that couldn't exist with uncertainty-based paradigm. You're part of leading edge of this transformation, not because you're special or evolved or chosen. Because you're confused, because quantum door opened for you, because you're reading these words, which means consciousness is ready to recognize confusion as gift rather than as curse. And your readiness matters because consciousness is collective. Your quantum doorway affects field. Your willingness to stay confused creates permission for others to relieve their desperate need for false certainty. Share this transmission. Every person who recognizes their confusion as quantum doorway rather than as personal failure, who learns to be consciously confused rather than suffering in ego confusion, who allows manifestation to emerge from uncertainty rather than forcing it from limited certainty, every person accelerates collective shift. We're approaching threshold where quantum-based creation becomes more common than certainty-based limitation, where humanity learns to manifest from infinite possibility rather than from narrow, predetermined outcomes. There's a moment approaching, perhaps it's already here, where you'll face ultimate choice. Not external decision about what to do, but internal quantum choice about how you'll relate to not knowing. The choice between continuing to fight confusion, trying to return to certainty as quickly as possible, demanding clarity before you can move forward, or surrendering completely into confusion as permanent doorway, recognizing that quantum living means staying open to not knowing even when you have temporary clarity. This choice can't be made from ego. Ego will always choose certainty over confusion because ego is built on knowing who it is, what it wants, where it's going. Uncertainty threatens ego's existence. Confusion feels like death to identity that's constructed from fixed beliefs and clear plans. So the choice has to come from deeper consciousness, from awareness that recognizes it can function perfectly well while being profoundly confused about everything. Ancient Zen masters spoke of don't know mind, not as temporary state to pass through on way to enlightenment, but as enlightenment itself. Not knowing isn't obstacle preventing awakening. Not knowing is awakening. Because the separate self is built entirely on certainty about who you are, what reality is, how things work. When that certainty dissolves completely, when you arrive at I don't know as fundamental position, self dissolves with it. What remains is pure consciousness operating without the limitation of knowing. This choice becomes easier when you recognize what you're actually choosing between. Not between wisdom and ignorance. Not knowing is wisdom while false certainty is ignorance. Not between power and weakness. Confusion is quantum power while certainty is limitation. Not between peace and chaos. Conscious confusion is peace while forcing clarity creates internal chaos. You're choosing between illusion of certainty that feels safe, but keeps you trapped in small version of possible, and reality of uncertainty that feels risky, but opens infinite possibility. I faced this choice 10 years ago after a period of confusion resolved into temporary clarity. I had direction, knew what I wanted, felt certain about path forward, and there was huge relief in that certainty, huge comfort in knowing again after months of not knowing. But something in me recognized, this certainty feels good, but it's also limiting. It's closing quantum door. It's collapsing field into narrow probability, and I could feel that consciousness wanted to stay more open, more fluid, more uncertain than this clarity was allowing. So I chose differently than ego wanted, not to abandon the temporary clarity. It was useful for taking certain actions, but to hold it lightly, to recognize it as provisional knowing rather than as absolute truth, to stay inwardly confused even while appearing outwardly clear, to keep quantum door open even while walking through temporary doorway that clarity created. That choice, to remain essentially uncertain even while functionally certain, changed everything about how I create reality. Because what I discovered is, you can have temporary clarity about specific things while maintaining fundamental confusion about everything. You can know what to do next without knowing where it leads. You can be certain about immediate steps without needing certainty about ultimate destination. This paradox, clear and confused simultaneously, is how quantum consciousness operates. Ego demands either or. Quantum self holds both and that both and is where real magic happens. Once you've chosen to remain in conscious confusion as baselines rather than more aligned with what actually is, rather than with what you think should be. And this way of living becomes so natural that returning to certainty-based life becomes impossible, not through discipline, but through recognition that you can't unknow what confusion has taught you. Living from quantum doorway means every day is fresh. You don't wake up knowing what you're doing based on predetermined plan. You wake up curious about what wants to happen, what opportunities will present themselves, what the day will reveal. This doesn't mean passive waiting or lack of action. This means active engagement with uncertainty, allowing each moment to inform next moment rather than following script written from previous certainty about how life should unfold. Work transform completely. Career built on certainty, on knowing what you're building toward, on 5-year plans, on predictable advancement, feels suffocating when you're living from quantum doorway. What emerges instead is flow. Doing what wants to be done now without needing to know how it fits into larger career narrative. Projects appear. Opportunities arise. Income manifests through channels that wouldn't have been visible if you'd been following certain path. And all of it feels more authentic because it's emerging from present moment responsiveness rather than from past decisions about what you should be doing. Relationships exist in present moment rather than being based on certainty about future. You're not relating from, this is my partner, or this is my friend, with all the fixed expectations those labels carry. You're relating freshly in each interaction, without knowing what relationship will become, or whether it will last, or what role other person plays in your life story. This creates real intimacy, because you're meeting person as they actually are, rather than as who you need them to be to match your certainty about relationship. Decision-making becomes immediate rather than analytical. You don't spend days or weeks analyzing options, weighing pros and cons, trying to predict outcomes. You feel into what wants to happen, and you do it. Not impulsively. There's often profound stillness before the knowing arises, but without the lengthy deliberation that certainty requires, because you're not trying to make right decision that leads to predetermined outcome. You're following energy that's moving in present moment without needing to know where it's taking you. Fear loses its power because fear requires certainty about bad outcomes. If you're genuinely confused about future, if you don't know what will happen, fear has nothing to attach to. Yes, this might not work out, but you don't know that. Yes, that could go wrong, but you don't know that either. Without certainty about negative outcomes, fear becomes just sensation moving through body rather than story that paralyzes action. And you discover you can act while afraid, create while uncertain, move forward while confused. Purpose emerges moment by moment, rather than being something you figure out once and follow forever. You're not trying to discover your purpose as if it's a fixed thing waiting to be found. You're allowing purpose to express through whatever you're drawn to in this moment. Writing this, teaching that, creating this other thing. No single activity needs to be the purpose. Each engagement can be purposeful in itself without fitting into overarching narrative about what your life is meant to accomplish. I live from quantum doorway now. Not perfectly. There are still times when ego grabs onto temporary clarity and tries to make it permanent certainty. But those moments are exceptions. Baseline is conscious confusion. Comfortable, not knowing. Genuine curiosity about what will emerge rather than need to control what emerges. And from that baseline, life is surprising. Quantum intelligence delivers possibilities I wouldn't have imagined. Opportunities appear that certainty would have filtered out. And I keep discovering that the less I know, the more quantum field can work through me. There comes a point where conscious confusion becomes irreversible. Not because you can't experience temporary clarity, you can and do, but because you've seen too clearly that certainty is limitation, recognized too completely that confusion opens quantum door, felt too deeply the power of not knowing. Return to certainty as permanent baseline becomes impossible, not through avoiding it, but through recognizing you don't need it the way you thought you did. This irreversible shift stabilizes gradually through living from confusion. One day you realize, I haven't been certain about anything important for months, and not only am I functioning, I'm thriving. Life is working better than when I was trying to control everything through certainty. Manifestations are appearing that my knowing would have prevented, and the confusion that used to feel unbearable now feels like home, like natural state, like how consciousness is meant to operate when it's not trapped in ego's need to know. The shift confirms itself through what no longer compels you. Certainty that used to feel like achievement now feels like prison. Knowing that used to provide security now feels like limitation. Clarity that used to be goal now feels like premature collapse of quantum possibilities, not because certainty is bad, but because you've discovered something more powerful. The quantum state of not knowing where all possibilities exist simultaneously until consciousness itself determines which serves highest evolution. You also notice what no longer disturbs you. Others' need for you to be certain. Social pressure to have clear plans. Cultural expectation that successful people know exactly what they're doing. None of it triggers you into defending your confusion or forcing false clarity. You're comfortable enough in not knowing that others' discomfort with your uncertainty doesn't shake you. You recognize they're projecting their own fear of confusion onto you, and that's their journey, not yours. Ancient teachings speak of beginner's mind, approaching each moment fresh without knowing, filtering perception. That's what becomes natural when confusion is baseline. Every experience is new because you're not interpreting through certainty about what things mean or how they work. Every person is mystery because you're not categorizing them through knowing about who they are. Every moment is potential because you're not limiting it through certainty about what's possible. 15 years after I first recognized confusion as quantum doorway, I still remember what certainty-based living felt like. The constant effort to maintain knowing, the anxiety when clarity dissolved, the forcing of decisions before they were ready, the suffering that came from reality not matching certainty. But I can't imagine returning to that as permanent state. Not because I'm disciplined enough to avoid certainty. Because consciousness recognizes certainty as optional tool that serves specific purposes but isn't necessary as baseline state. This doesn't mean I'm always confused. Temporary clarity arises when it's needed. Immediate knowing emerges for specific decisions. But the fundamental position is, I don't know, rather than I know. And from that position, quantum intelligence can work through consciousness without being blocked by ego's need to control through knowing. The paradox is, the less I know, the more effective everything becomes. The more confused I am about big picture, the clearer the immediate next steps are. The more uncertain I am about future, the more present I am to what's actually happening now. If you're sensing this irreversible shift toward confusion as baseline, write in the comments, "Quantum door stays open." That declaration acknowledges what's stabilized. That conscious confusion has become your natural state. That you're no longer fighting not knowing, but living from it. That quantum doorway isn't place you occasionally visit, but space you continuously inhabit. That you've discovered confusion isn't obstacle to overcome, but way of being that allows consciousness to operate at quantum level. And if you're not there yet, if you're still fighting confusion, still trying to return to certainty, still uncomfortable in not knowing, trust the process. The discomfort is ego resisting what consciousness is ready for. The confusion is quantum door opening. The not knowing is invitation to step into larger way of being than certainty allows. You're not failing by being confused. You're succeeding. The confusion is evidence that consciousness is evolving beyond its current limitations, and quantum field is preparing to deliver possibilities your certainty would never recognize. Every video on this channel transmits frequency that supports quantum living through conscious confusion. Every teaching points toward not knowing as wisdom. Every transmission activates your recognition that certainty is limitation, while confusion is doorway. If you haven't subscribed, if these teachings resonate, but you haven't committed, do it now. Your quantum self is telling you this channel supports your evolution from certainty-based limitation to confusion-based possibility. Subscribers' declaration that you're choosing confusion over false certainty. As willingness to stay and not knowing even when ego screams for clarity. As recognition that quantum door opens through confusion, and you're ready to walk through rather than continuing to fight against the very state that offers access to infinite possibility. Everything shared until now has been pointing toward this moment. This exact moment where you're reading these words while experiencing whatever confusion brought you here. This isn't future teaching to apply later. This is present activation happening now as consciousness recognizes itself in state of not knowing and realizes, the confusion isn't preventing me from living fully. The confusion is allowing me to live more fully than certainty ever permitted. Notice right now, what are you confused about? Not as problem to solve, but as reality to acknowledge. You don't know something. Maybe you don't know many things. About your life, your path, your purpose, your direction. And that not knowing, that genuine uncertainty, can you feel how it's not emptiness? Can you sense how it's actually fullness? How quantum door opens in the space where knowing used to be, revealing possibilities that knowing was blocking. Take a breath, deep one. And as you breathe, let yourself be confused. Not as failure, as power, as quantum state, as consciousness operating from superposition where all possibilities exist simultaneously rather than collapsed into single limited certainty. You don't know, and you don't need to know. The not knowing is enough. The confusion is complete in itself. The quantum door is open. Can you feel the relief in that? The release of having to know? The freedom of being allowed to be genuinely uncertain? That relief is consciousness recognizing its true nature. You are not certainty. You are awareness. And awareness can be completely uncertain and still function perfectly, still create magnificently, still manifest what serves highest evolution. The knowing was never requirement. The confusion was never obstacle. Everything you thought about certainty and confusion was backwards. This is the transmission beneath words. Not teaching about confusion, but direct experience of being confused consciously. Not information about quantum door, but actual doorway opening as you read. Not concept about not knowing, but lived reality of consciousness existing fully while knowing nothing. And in this moment of genuine confusion, of authentic uncertainty, of real not knowing, you're more powerful than you've ever been when you were certain. Your confusion is quantum doorway. Walk through it, not by figuring out where it leads, by being willing to not know where it leads while you walk, by trusting that consciousness doesn't require map when it's following quantum intelligence, by recognizing that every step into unknown is step into larger possibility than certainty could ever provide. In coming days, watch what emerges from your confusion. Notice opportunities appearing you wouldn't have seen if you'd been certain. Feel synchronicities aligning you can't explain logically. Observe manifestations occurring you didn't plan or predict. The quantum door is open now, not because you did something right, because you stopped doing anything at all, because you surrendered into not knowing and allowed quantum field to work without ego's interference through false certainty. If this transmission activated your willingness to be confused consciously, to stay in quantum doorway, to live from not knowing rather than forcing knowing, share it. Others are confused too. Others are fighting against the very state that's trying to liberate them. Others need to hear, your confusion isn't failure, it's doorway. And walking through that doorway requires nothing except willingness to not know. Write final comment. Just, I don't know, and that's perfect. That statement isn't admission of defeat. It's declaration of freedom. It's recognition that consciousness doesn't need certainty. It's quantum door fully opening. This is quantum reflex. This is consciousness learning to live from confusion rather than from certainty. This is quantum doorway revealing itself in the space where knowing used to be. You're not confused because something's wrong. You're confused because something's right. Because consciousness is ready for possibilities that certainty prevents. Because quantum field is preparing to deliver what your knowing would never allow. If you are confused, it means the quantum door is open for you. Walk through it, not by knowing where you're going, by being willing to not know. That's where everything you've been seeking has been waiting, in the confusion you've been fighting against. Welcome to Quantum Doorway. Welcome to conscious confusion. Welcome to manifestation that certainty prevents. The door is open. Step through.